The revival celebrations at home can be divided into two aspects. There's the 60 revival and the 61.
It was on the night of Tuesday, the 27th of December, 1831, after the Christmas holidays. In fact, the next day, the 28th, was when Sam Sharpe had planned that they should do this massive sit-down strike, which he hoped would end slavery.
The Indians brought two things with them. They brought Hinduism, but they also brought Islam too, although Islam was here before.
The nation celebrates Heritage Week with several activities aimed at encouraging greater appreciation of all outstanding men and women in Jamaican history, as well as highlighting our cultural heritage.
Take a look at some of the personalities, events, and traditions which have gone into making our heritage. We will look at some Indian traditions, talk with our special guest, Reverend Dr. Horace Russell, about Sam Sharpe and about religious influences in Jamaica, national hero George William Gordon, also the work of the Institute of Jamaica. We want to start today with the presentation of the Indian Seal, a religious ritual combining English, African, Christian, and Hindu traditions. There is, however, a heavy bias towards the Indian tradition, evidenced in the sounds, dress, dance, and presence of kalaloo and other vegetables. You know, when this country became free, the planters immediately had a problem with the workforce, because the workforce felt they wanted to get away from the estates as far as possible. So the thing is, who was going to plant sugar and reap sugar? And one solution, of course, was to bring immigrants into the country. And among the largest, well, perhaps the largest number of immigrants brought in came from India, East Indians. And they started coming in 1845. And in fact, the Indian community recently unveiled a plaque in Old Harbor near the site of where they first landed in Jamaica. Now, of course, they brought a new influence with them, a new cultural influence into Jamaica. But because they were working on sugar estates, they immediately got into a very close relationship with the African population, the black population. They worked shoulder to shoulder on the estates, and they shared this common experience of working on estates. And their cultural manifestations in some instances flowed into each other.
The revival celebrations at home can be divided into two aspects. There's the 60 revival and the 61. 60 much more Christian than the 61, which tends to have the African input. Now it was the 61 revival which got interrelated with some of the Indian aspects of their culture and their association together. And it is very interesting that in the celebrations, the whole business of kalaloo and all of this is brought into it as the whole business of trying to get to the spirit and to be infilled by the Spirit. There are other aspects to it which, for instance, the whole business of the Spirit, there is a sense in which to be filled by the Spirit means that you are out of yourself. And we know that kalaloo water sometimes makes people feel out of themselves. You find it in the Old Testament, in Scripture as well, where the prophets drank wine to stimulate their prophecy at times, not a thing that prophets do today. But this is another aspect of our culture that we need to look at.
Sam Sharpe is very closely associated with Montego Bay. In fact, he was a Montego Bay boy. He was executed in front of the courthouse, and today the square, which is there, bears his name, Sam Sharpe Square. Let's pause here to reflect on our national hero, Sam Sharpe.
One of Jamaica's national heroes, Sam Sharpe, is known for evolving a plan of passive resistance under which all slaves were to refuse to work on Christmas Day, 1831 and onwards. That is, unless the grievances of the slaves were considered and the matter of freedom addressed. Unfortunately, this plan was spread right across the island, and word of the plan reached the authorities. The result? Warships were anchored in Montego Bay and Black River with guns trained on the town. Sam Sharpe's plan of peaceful resistance was aborted. Violent actions took place, resulting in much damage to property and loss of lives. In the aftermath, 312 people were executed, and Sam Sharpe was hanged for his part on May 22nd, 1832. Of course, the Abolition Bill was passed in 1834. Slavery itself was abolished 6 years after Sharpe's death. "I would rather die upon yonder gallows than live in slavery," said Sam Sharpe.
It was on the night of Tuesday, the 27th of December, 1831, after the Christmas holidays. In fact, the next day, the 28th, was when Sam Sharpe had planned that they should do this massive sit-down strike, which he hoped would end slavery. But on the night preceding it, the 27th, all of a sudden, a tongue of fire shot up in the darkness on Kensington Estate. And it was a symbol, the signal for the start of a grand uprising, a massive uprising where about 50,000 people were involved, who in the subsequent days roamed throughout Western Jamaica, hoping that the day of freedom had dawned. And actually what it also signaled was other fires, the start of other fires, because over 160 properties in Western Jamaica were burnt during that period. And of course, a band of the slaves attacked the Western Interior Regiment, which was on duty in the interior of Western Jamaica, and drove them along with their reinforcements, the 7th Company of the St. James Militia, back to Montego Bay. And of course, in the reprisals which followed, 500 slaves were killed, including Samuel Sharpe. But the point is that Kensington Estate was the place on which that first fire was set, which signaled the start of the entire operations, which resulted in the 1831 rebellion, which in turn was one of the things which speeded up freedom in Jamaica, the end of slavery and the beginning of freedom in Jamaica. As we said earlier, we have today in our program the Reverend Dr. Horace Russell as our special guest, who will be talking about Sam Sharpe and about religious influences in Jamaica. Now, Reverend Russell, I think it is undeniable that religion has played a tremendously important part in the development of the Jamaican people and the Jamaican nation.
Yes, that's true. The very basis of our society, indeed all the societies of the world, have had in them this religion in a very formative way, a personal religion as well as a community religion.
Yes.
And this has been true here.
And I think that the important thing about it is that the concern for people that was expressed through religion in Jamaica, where the secular, the government, whatever was indifferent or even oppressive, it was the religious organizations, I think, that latched onto this business of the importance of the human being.
Yes, yeah, but we have got to put that in context.
Yes.
The religions, whatever they are, have at all times been concerned with the individual as well as with the community. There have been a community religion, so to speak, state religion, all that sort of thing. So to say that the government was not itself interested in religion is not quite true.
No, not religion. I'm sorry, I was mistaken. What I meant was that in the terms of the welfare of the people, and I'm talking about Jamaica,
yes,
the newly freed people.
Well, you had the state religion which carried the norms of society, so to speak. Yeah. But then at the same time, there was this, and this arose at this time very strongly, the rather individual aspect of religion in which, through the Methodist revival, and the revival evangelical movement, that religion and ethics had to go hand in hand. Not just personal piety now, but also on a community basis. And this was very true in Britain, and it came here in Jamaica through Baptists and Methodists and some Anglicans. In a very people of the Church Missionary Society, for instance.
Yes.
In terms of African religions, which are always here, African religions have always been people-centered, so there was always that basis there. In terms of Judaism, the same thing is true, and Hinduism, which did not quite arrive just then, but came later on. You have both aspects. And Islam, which was here with many of the slaves, while having a very legal content, nevertheless had this whole sense of the mercy of Allah and the wonder of His grace. There is grace in Islam. So you had that white basis.
Yes. But the peculiar circumstances of Jamaica's history, where our country started out in a condition of bondage for the majority of the people, and where their humanity as equal human beings had to be established. I think that the church religion, certainly the non-conformist religions, played a very important part in establishing the equality of the humanity of all peoples in this country. And I think particularly of the 1830s, the fight of the missionaries like Nib and Abbott and the rest in Whitehorn, in places like Falmouth,
yes,
that underlay the whole development of the social structure of this country.
Yeah, but they did not do it alone. Their congregations demanded of them this, and it sprang from the scriptures in a very, very basic way, particularly from the Old Testament. And in some research that I have done, I think conclusively shown that the passages that were frequently expounded were passages that dealt with liberation coming out of Exodus and various other places like Isaiah, Amos, the 8th century prophets. And this was part and parcel of the very ethos of the people. So that the sense of freedom and equality and all of this, while their situation demanded it, at the same time the gospel that they
backed them up in that.
Yes,
Yes.
was there.
Yes.
And it's very interesting that Martin Jarrett Carr, of the Carr Jarrett family incidentally, wrote a book called Christian Acceptance, in which he pointed out that nearly every revolutionary movement, and incidentally it includes some of those today, every revolutionary movement within the Christian context has come from a rereading of the scriptures.
And I think too, Dr. Russell, that the founding of institutions to train Jamaicans into positions of responsibility, for instance, exemplified in Calabar Theological School at Rio Bueno.
That's true.
Is another very important aspect of the...
And the other schools, there was one, for instance, the Presbyterian school in Montego Bay, and there were one or two other schools in Shortwood and elsewhere. And these schools, their attempt was to help to create leadership. It was a definite attempt to do this. And I think that we are now on National Heritage Week. I think that Sam Sharpe is an example of this, because Sam Sharpe was obviously a very well-read person, but also a person who thought. And it is quite clear from his speeches and that we have, bits that we have, and the reports of his life, that he was influenced by the Bible within the context of some of the prevailing concepts of the meaning of the individual at the time. See, it was the time when William Carey going out to India, who in his going out to India maintained that the gospel was for everybody. It was also the time when you know yourself of the philosophers who maintained that man was born free. That was the whole area in which the whole areas in which he was maintaining his views. And I don't think we can take Sam Sharpe out of the context of the world of his time, which is not just Jamaica. Sorry, have you ever stopped to think that this sit-down rebellion so-called, inverted commas, first sit-down strike was in fact one of the earliest manifestations of that sort of industrial action in the world?
Well, I don't know of anyone earlier, and not only that, but I think the comparison between Martin Luther King Jr. and Mahatma Gandhi, we have to bear in mind that Sam Sharpe had these ideas long before, and not only that, but he had them in a world where he had no protection whatsoever, no world opinion to protect him of backing, and not even the laws of his own country to protect him.
Precisely.
Yes,
Precisely.
he was in greater peril.
Yeah.
Of course, all three of them died, didn't they?
Oh, well, that's true.
And I think, yes, I think also that the religious institutions also helped to found the free communities of Jamaica. And I think this was also a very important thing in the development of the Jamaican nation.
You know, the relationship between religion and land has not been fully exploited. But I think the free village system and how it emerged from 1832 is something that we need to look at again.
Dr. Russell, perhaps you'd like to say something about the other influences that the Indians brought in and how they mixed with the Jamaican situation.
The Indians brought two things with them. They brought Hinduism, but they also brought Islam too, although Islam was here before. And Hosay is, of course, a Shiite festival which celebrates the martyrdom of one of the descendants of the Prophet. And this aspect is the aspect which is celebrated in Islam and speaks about the giving of oneself, right? In martyrdom.
In Racecourse, Clarendon, for as long as most people can remember, an Indian festival, locally known as Hosay, brings musicians, singers, and droves of people out on the street. We spend a day there just to bring you what it's all about. Dr. Mansingh tells us of the origins of the festival.
Hosay really is a annual mourning session for Shia Muslims. Shia Muslims are a sect of Muslims who separated from the other sect that is called Sunni immediately after the death of Prophet Muhammad. Prophet Muhammad's son-in-law was their candidate to succeed the Prophet as Caliph after he died in 632 AD. But he was not the successful one. However, Ali did become Caliph later on, only to be killed by one Muawiyah. When Muawiyah killed him, he didn't get much support from the public, so he agreed that after he dies, the caliphate will return to his sons, that is Hassan. Hassan was then forced to sign a treaty that he will never claim the caliphate, and later Muawiyah invited Hussein, his younger brother, to come and take over the caliphate, and when he came, they attacked him brutally and killed him. So from then on the 10th day of Muharram is a Muslim month, as you know, the 10th day of Muharram when this occurred, which corresponds to about 680 AD. From then on, the Shia Muslims have always been mourning his death every year on the 10th day of Muharram. When the Indians came to Jamaica, they carried this tradition, although there were only about 10% of the Indian indentured immigrants who were Muslims. But in India, Hindu and Muslims celebrate all the festivals together. So this became an Indian festival. You may have seen today that a Hindu lady and a Muslim lady were singing the morning songs, because that is how the tradition has been here. And from then on, every year this was the main attraction. It was kind of parish carnival, both here in Clarendon, not both, but in Clarendon, Westmoreland, Portland, never in St. Thomas, St. Mary, and also in Kingston. Something happened here around the 1950s when the Indian population got scattered, that the festival, Indian festival, started to decline, particularly in St. Mary and Portland, but Clarendon has held on, Clarendon and Kingston. And up to 1975, I found that they used about 3-4 tazias. Now these structures that you see there are called tazia. They are supposed to be the tomb carrying the grave of Hassan and Hussein. There used to be 3 or 4. One of them was made by an Afro-Jamaican, a black Jamaican, who from his childhood was brought up with the Indians, so he always made them. This year they told me that they could not arrange for the paper and other material, so they made only one. This is something we have to look into. But what I am pleased about this year's Hosay is that it was a mixture of crowd. There were more Afro-Jamaicans than Indians. And I think that is the strength of Jamaican society, where the majority starts patronizing the minority culture, and then that survives.
The musicians accompanied the tazia through the streets, stopping at various buildings where the crowds dance and sing the songs of mourning and throw rice.